So awesome. Thank you guys for sticking around. Zak deserves so much credit for this movie, not just the finished product, but if you knew everything that he went through. This is the first time Xbox had ever made a movie, and it was the last time Xbox ever made a movie. So they kind of created this new film division, and this documentary was going to be their flagship product, which it was. But once I got involved, I could just see. I was like, wow, how is Zak even making this movie? It was chaos. Like one of the things I always remember is they posted they were trying to get people to come to the dump. So they posted the address of where the dig was going to happen, but it was the wrong address. It was the current Alamogordo dump, and not the old one where we were shooting. So that address went out. So if we hadn't corrected that, everybody would have shown up at the wrong, would have lined up at the wrong dump, and nothing would have happened. Like weird logistic stuff like that, he was dealing with through the whole production. So this is a miracle that this movie got made, and I don't even know how much money was spent to dig up these cartridges.
Yeah, well, a lot of it was spent. Xbox didn't really reveal the budget to me, so. But I think if it's okay, our plan was to show you some of these deleted scenes, and then we'll go into kind of talking more about the movie in general, and some of them we'll talk about how Ernie helped me save this. But so I'm just going to set up these clips for you. The first clip, as you can probably tell, when they had hired me to do this, I thought, okay, well, we'll go find these games, and that'll be the documentary. And part of the reason why they had hired me is because I had made this movie Incident at Loch Ness, which is kind of almost a parody of documentaries with Werner Herzog. And so, I had a plan, like, what if we don't find anything? I'm gonna make like a funny movie about a terrible documentary. So as I got there and realized, wait, this could actually happen, I started playing up my own idiocy a little bit more, just so I'd have something to cut to. So this first clip, you noticed a little bit with this ridiculous headset that I'm wearing at one point. That was a runner that I was gonna keep wearing more and more elaborate microphones. But so this first clip is just me kind of messing with Joe, trying to get something out of it just in case we found nothing. So we're gonna start with something light. So roll that clip.
Yes, please roll.
If you would. Yeah, this isn't it yet.
This is the section 1.
This is a tremendous amount of detective work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's paying you to do all this. You just did this on your own, right?
My curiosity of history, the real story, not the movie version. The real story.
I prefer the movie version. You can't just go out there yourself with a shovel and dig up these ET games, right?
No, it's owned by the city of Alamogordo. Starts with them saying, "Okay, can we do it?" Then we have to go to the state of New Mexico Environment Department, which I did back in October 2011.
Well, that's a lot of bureaucracy.
Oh yeah.
Joe, when you come out here, when you stand out here, what do you think about?
Well,
Because I think about the dreams of a generation buried underneath the garbage. That's what comes to mind for me.
well, originally when it all happened, to us it was just more
Can
garbage.
you just litter here? Could I just
No.
throw my garbage on the ground?
No, you're not supposed to be out, not legally.
Isn't there some sort of sonar that you could use to figure out exactly what's underneath the ground, like the games themselves?
No, they're not going to be able to read a title under
What
all
about
the trash.
isn't there like a satellite? Doesn't the Army or something have this satellite that could, look under the ground?
So, my producers actually didn't know what I was doing and didn't think it was very funny, but I just felt like I better do something, because if it's Al Capone's vault, I'm screwed. So the next clip actually is, as I started to interview Joe, two things were happening. One is I was starting to get more and more worried that we actually weren't going to find the games. Like when I asked him, what do we do if you don't find it in the first dig? When he told me, oh, well, then we're screwed, I was shocked. I just thought, oh, I thought we'd dig until we find him. He's like, no, that'll be it, movie over. So I started to realize that Joe was a pretty interesting character in and of himself. And as it went along, I started to realize that maybe he's the main character of this movie. So I also realized he sounded a lot like Ray Romano. So let's roll the second clip, which I forget what it is, but it's about Joe. That was it. Just half a screen. It's very avant-garde. It's my Andy Warhol deleted scene.
Don't look right into the lens.
I don't want to look right into the lens.
Okay, good. Let's say we don't find anything. What do you think that will be like for Joe?
Oh, devastation, really. A lot of hopes broken. It would just be awful. Joe would be really down for a while, but he would take that downtime and build a diorama and make E.T. and Atari there.
The dioramas are my distraction from stress. It's just something I did as a kid. Then in the military, I built them when I was stationed in various places. I research them and then I build them from scratch.
Oh, these are incredible.
My thing is more about history. I like to study the history and then build them accurately to the time period, such as the Roman legions, and this one's Four Feathers.
From the movie Four Feathers?
It's like, yeah.
So these are dioramas of movie interpretations of history?
Some are historical.
Do you have one from Behind Enemy Lines?
No, I saw your bio. I was going to make one now.
That'd be good. It'd be a good diorama.
Yeah.
I forgot how short and stupid that one was. Okay, but actually those dioramas were really fascinating, and this guy is actually an incredibly smart guy. He actually had a lot in common with Howard Warshaw. I mean, he had a master's degree. He was an incredibly, when I said like he was a garbologist, he really was. He had done quite a bit of work. So anyway, this is definitely, for Ernie and I, this is the thing that killed us the most. I mean, both of us were so into this story, but it killed me to cut this. We just had to do it for time. But one of the most amazing stories that we stumbled across as we were desperately looking for something in case we didn't find the games was this, first of all, evidence that the games had actually been buried, and then particularly this legendary story of a group of kids who had supposedly biked into the dump. And I'll let it speak for itself.
Yeah, that was always one of the parts of the story that always fascinated me, because when you heard about this story growing up, that was the first thing you imagined, like, oh, what if, like, you went to school one morning and there was a rumor throughout the school, like, my dad works at the dump, they brought in truckloads of Atari cartridges, and they're all just laying out there at the dump. And so, like, it's just that, what would you do if you knew that there were and consoles and other Atari hardware? So this is my favorite.
Yeah, and it's story. Also, this is the most Amblin real life story you'll see. All right, so let's roll that clip.
Yeah.
I'm not a big gamer, never was a big gamer, never had time to be a big gamer. And if I had that kind of time, I was building houses, building cars, or building dioramas. The dioramas are my imagination. It's the research. Can the story be told? Are there people that help tell the story? This is actually the list I started compiling, and where could I find people who had involvement? So I broke it into three levels of witnesses.
3 kinds of witnesses.
Right.
So that's right.
Okay. And then there was the next level would have been employees of mine.
That's the second kind.
That's the second level. And the third level is people that weren't part of the garbage companies that dumped
that
them.
you would have called the close witnesses of the third kind.
The third kind. Right. That's the kids that snuck in, the teenagers that snuck in, the ones that went in and acquired the games in the middle of the night.
So we're now at the edge of the landfill. Where did you come in?
North of here, an old road to get from First Street all the way to the back of the tracks.
Right.
The way I found out about it was one of my buddies, his dad worked for the landfill. My buddy Joseph, he's like, yeah, my dad told me they were dumping a bunch of Atari games at the landfill. You know, right away I'm thinking, I gotta tell my boys. We were living in poverty, we couldn't afford a lot of video games. So when I told my buddies, their heads started spinning and the plan just all came together.
We get on our bikes from the projects and we ride up here to the landfill. You know, being small, I'd always found this, you know.
Because of the dump and them throwing food and everything away, you're gonna have different kind of animals. The landfill was infested with rats,
Coyotes,
definitely snakes,
skunks,
skunks.
mainly skunks. Those, they look like seagulls, but I'm not sure they're
Oh, yeah.
seagulls. Just those birds
We sent the 2 young guys out.
up on top of the hill. And once they saw the security guard enter his vehicle and turn it on, that's when we snuck in.
And when we got there, we were like, holy crap, look at this. There were thousands of games in the ground.
What'd you break the concrete with?
Shovels from the Army that has a shovel on one end and you unscrew it and it turns to a pick on the other end. That's a tools that we would
I say,
use.
I have no idea, but I believe it.
It was like finding gold for us. So we just start hammering away, putting them all in our bags. Obviously, we were nervous as hell.
I remember running, and while I was running, I remember I was crying because I got sprayed by a skunk.
It was pretty funny at the time until we got home and his mom, we had to tell his mom that it wasn't funny anymore. But we were always worried about getting sprayed with skunks. That was
Skunks
bad.
seem to have taken up a lot of your childhood. I mean,
We were so excited, we just couldn't believe it. We all had a bag full of hundreds of Atari games. It was pretty crazy.
so it must be kind of satisfying. This like childhood adventure you guys had is now kind of a legend.
Well, we think it's pretty cool actually because we were involved in it. It was an adventure for us to go out that night. Probably one of the best nights that we had as kids. But now that I look back and see the significance of it, it's pretty exciting that we were involved that night and such a big part of the gaming history.
All right. Isn't that great? One of our other interview subjects is here in the audience, Mike Micah. Wave, Mike. You could come up and join us this other chair. But Mike and I, when we were there in Alamogordo, we talked a lot about maybe making a new version of E.T. that is based on those guys, where you actually play like one of the kids in Alamogordo sneaking into the dump to try to get the old games and avoiding skunks and stuff. We talked with Howard about doing that as well.
Yeah, right.
Here, let me turn that up. Yes.
Yeah, but before we segue into that one, there is one more clip
Oh, okay,
before
sorry.
that. That's all right. So just to kind of polish off the question of, nervously trying to find out, did this actually happen, and where the games were, randomly, I'd say like 3 days before we did all this, we get a call from this guy, Jim Heller, who basically says, oh yeah, I heard you're doing this. I buried him. And we kind of didn't believe him, but he's like, no, I'm serious. And someone checked him out and we had someone call and he came down, we interviewed him. I had to cut it for time, but check it out. You can imagine after all this, speculation,
I
suddenly.
was told one day that we were going to be getting back a large number of cartridges. Turned out at the Christmas season it was nowhere near as good as what had been projected. So a lot of our distributors had actually millions of cartridges that didn't sell. I had 2 warehouses that were full of cartridges. It was useless merchandise and we were just told to destroy them. So they said, find some place local. Alamogordo had a landfill that would accept the cartridges, and Alamogordo did not allow scavenging in the landfill. We picked Alamogordo because it was the closest landfill to El Paso, and it was going to save some money in transportation costs. So the games would be crushed by a bulldozer, a big one, and buried about 30 foot deep. I had been gone for the weekend, came back and was told as soon as I walked in the building that the news media is going crazy. They're calling, wanting to know what we're doing. We had cartridges that we had dumped at the landfill. Kids had come and scavenged the cartridges and they'd been arrested trying to sell the cartridges. So I ordered 6 dump truck loads of concrete to be delivered to the landfill and cover them up with concrete.
So 1983, you bury them all and this whole thing happens. When's the next time you heard about it?
June of 2013.
Wow, so all those years nobody ever contacted you?
Absolutely not.
So, semi-interesting little bit of trivia. There's actually one more before we get to the mic thing, which is, one of the things that was crucial to this whole operation was, we were inviting the public to come watch this. And luckily, we had Ernie Cline to help us with this. And, I had met Ernie, just when he told me about this, but he basically, he was the one who found that it was the wrong address. He's the one who set up a contest. He did all this other stuff. And frankly, when I pitched, the Xbox guys that I was going to interview Ernie and we were going to follow him on this journey, at first they're like, I don't get it, we don't understand, and why do you want to do this silly graphic? But then, and this is just my favorite Hollywood story ever, they saw a cut of the movie, which by the way, they thought was really unfunny and stupid. And they said, the one thing is, why isn't there more Ernie Cline? This guy, Ernie Cline, and again, and you have to understand, I had been hired to write Ready Player One while I was making this documentary. So I get these notes that say, do you know that Ernie Cline wrote a book called Ready Player One? And it sold for $1 million and it's being made as a movie by Warner Brothers right now. They're making a movie of Ready Player One. Why isn't that in the documentary? And I'm sitting there in this meeting like, I happen to know the screenwriter of Ready Player One. Would you like me to interview? I literally almost went and interviewed myself. But anyway, so this is some extra footage of Ernie. I believe what we're going to see now is just more, this is something I liked a lot, and it just didn't quite fit in, but it's Ernie and George R.R. Martin, and I figure you guys would want to see this, so check it out.
E.T. is going to be your driving companion here?
Yeah, I'm going to strap him into the passenger seat of the DeLorean so I can use the HOV lane. When I got invited to go to the Atari dig down in Alamogordo, I was looking for E.T. stuff. And I saw this life-size, somewhat lifelike E.T. replica that they were selling from someplace in China. And so I had to have it. But then when it showed up at my house, I realized that there was no way I was going to be able to fly with it unless I bought an extra seat.
Now, you're certain that they're going to find something there? It's not going to be Al Capone's vaults.
I know, that would be so great. I've been known to dig around in junkyards and landfills even when I don't know what's there. So, like doing this when I know there's a good artifacts, I decided to do it.
I clarified that later. Metaphorically, like watching lots of bad movies and playing bad video games, looking for treasure, but George still didn't think it was fun.
But just to give you some context, we had Ernie, our interview was like 45 minutes, and I think we used like 35% of the interview, which, in a documentary, you usually use some tiny percentage of it, but I basically, everything Ernie said, and I ended up using, except that little part. So now let's get to so I think this will be self-explanatory, but obviously, as we went on, I started to realize this is Howard Warshaw's story. And it wasn't immediately apparent at first, but the more I talked to him and the more, certainly when we saw how many people were showing up, but we did have some plans for Howard in advance, and partly because of these guys who were incredibly helpful to me working towards it. Originally, I had some pretty crazy ideas when I thought we weren't going to find anything. Like I was going to say, let's try to get somebody else to build a video game in 5 weeks based on a different Spielberg movie. So we were going to do a Lincoln video game, but we never went through with that. But in any event, we did have another plan that we came up with that I think Mike spearheaded. And I should say, Ernie is in this scene. He's just standing behind the camera because he and Mike actually had gotten the Atari 2600 working, the actual one that no one on my staff could get working. These guys actually went in there and figured it out, and also got one of the games to actually play, right? From the
almost.
Yeah.
Almost did.
No,
they are playable.
Yeah, that was one of the craziest parts of the experience for me. Is after this urban legend that we've heard for decades, right? And then we're there and we see E.T. cartridges come out of the ground, and then they put us in one of the portable little buildings that they brought to the dump, which was the only place where you could talk or breathe without garbage being blasted in your face. And we go into this little room and we set up the Atari, and then we got to guys who grew up playing Atari and hearing this legend were suddenly in the room with the E.T. cartridges, that have just come out of the ground with Howard Scott Warshaw standing behind us, like try to get these to work. And so we're taking the chips out of the cartridges that are all warped
with no tools.
With no tools,
We're
and trying to get them.
It was breaking like Hulk.
Yeah, still, it was the coolest.
But so this is a little bit different, but a really, I think, a very touching scene that I wanted to include, but the end worked the way it was. So let's check it out.
If I could go back and make 3 changes to E.T., the first thing I would do is make it so you can't fall back into a well when you're getting out of one. The second thing I would do is remove all of the things where you jump from one screen to another. And the third thing that I would do, really make it easier to organize the final sequence.
Right this way. Sorry for all the mystery. Howard, you might remember Mike Micah.
Mike, how you doing, man?
So, Howard, Mike and I together got someone to reprogram E.T. and fix some of the bugs that you had talked to me about in the interview.
Awesome. Really?
David Richardson's the guy who did the reprogramming.
Hi,
for us.
David.
That's Howard.
You
Warshaw.
too. I'm guessing that you can't fall back in a well once you get
You
out.
can from the top, but go ahead and walk right into that well right there. You'll see you can walk in front of it instead of...
Oh, that's interesting.
If you'll notice your energy counter at the bottom, you'll
do.
see that it's not going down, except...
Oh, when you're leaving the...
When you're leaving the well or when you're running or walking. That was to make it easier for new players to the game. If you can find the phone home zone, you can actually keep Elliot on the forest screen.
Oh, and that'll help you save your phone while you're waiting?
Exactly. So
Nice.
Elliot's on the screen, obviously none of the other humans will bother you. You can leave the forest here on the that side and not immediately fall into a well now, which is also kind of nice.
Oh, that is nice. I think that's really good work. I really like what I'm seeing.
I appreciate that.
But we are about to win the game of E.T. You could say we actually did that today at the Dig.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a fun day so far.
This has been a blast. Here we go. And here comes Elliot munching on some Reese's Pieces. And that's how we play E.T.
Indeed.
I was angry through that whole scene. I was like, this game doesn't need to be fixed. That was like half of my interview was making fun of people who complained about how hard E.T. was. Oh, did you fall down in the pit? Like, I was just disgusted. I was like, I kicked that game's ass when I was 13 and just played it endlessly and loved it to death. So people who are like, oh, you know, I could never solve it, I just...
Well, to be fair, we asked Howard early on, you know, what were the things you could fix, and then we set in motion. It took a while. I mean, we found this guy online, and it took a while to do that, despite Ernie's dislike of it. Although it is interesting, if you notice, Howard's still not completely, he's still a little critical of even the fixes. Like, he's still like, it's not quite what I would have done, but you know, whatever. But anyway, it had been a really emotional day, and just, you know, the idea, and he was really overwhelmed. I mean, none of us had any idea that there were going to be 400 or 500 people out there in the desert, and people were going to come out there and ask for Howard's, you know, autograph and know his work. And I will tell you, maybe segueing into the Q&A portion of or whatever we're going to do next. When we screened this at Comic-Con, which was very tense because the producers and the people at Xbox really first of all, they didn't think it was funny. And I kept saying, oh, you know, they're like, this awesome graphic thing is not funny. Why is this even, that's just pointless. And they didn't think my dialogue, whatever. So I was taking a lot of flack from them, and I was like, well, let's just wait till we get to a festival screening and see how it goes. And when we went to Comic-Con, you know, it was sold out, and that was wonderful. But at the end of the screening, which obviously got a lot of laughter and was really well, you know, was well received, or I wouldn't be telling you this story, I introduced Howard to, and these were like a lot of bigwigs from the industry who were there. And when Howard, he got a standing ovation, and people were crying. Like the head of Legendary was crying, like visibly, and you know, all these people who, not just people who were fans, but like, and Howard was crying, obviously, and I was crying. I mean, it was really this moment of, holy shit, people have overlooked this guy for so long, and I never anticipated, but like that alone was just such a satisfying experience. So whether we should or should not have fixed his game, it was not something I expected at all, but it's been, a wonderful experience.
Well, as a direct result of that too, because there's a line in there where I think I was talking about how he's never been to like the Game Developers Conference and recognized and everything like that. Because of this film, immediately following the next Game Developer Conference, he was brought up and recognized and inducted basically into the Hall of Fame for that, which is amazing because it was just like so well deserved.
Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to my editor, which never, doesn't often come up, but my editor, who's actually the tallest editor in the world, he's 6'8", but a guy who's won a bunch of Emmys on Galactica, and he worked on a show called Alphas, and he was more than an editor. He came up with that, like the murderer's row of incredible designers, that whole kind of end sequence. He kind of thought it up and just said, I cut something together, check it out. And I was like, that's perfect. You should get co-directing credit for this. But he also had made a documentary,
Man vs. Snake, about Nibbler, which is one of the best. Along with this, it's like one of my top 5 video games.
Fantastic. I recommend it. So.
Yeah, it's really good.
Can I get some water, actually, while thanks.
Yeah. Well, do you guys have, I'm not sure how much time we have. Anybody have any questions they would like to ask you, sir?
Hi. I wanted to say thanks for showing the deleted clips. Those were awesome, and thanks for doing this, of course. Also, I appreciate the fact that you flashed Pac-Man at the end of the sequence of covers of probably when you were talking, I think, about what other worst video games there were, because that was an all-time, that 2600 point sucked.
The worst.
And anyway, I had a quick question, particularly with regard to Howard, Manny, and Nolan. Were there anybody or anybody in the movie that didn't appreciate, that felt like they got kind of a bad treatment out of the deal after they saw the movie, or did they all kind of receive it well? I mean, because it seemed like a fair treatment, but...
No, none of them. Actually, I mean, to be honest with you, Joe Lewandowski was pretty angry at me, which I think is bizarre because I worship the guy and I thought I showed him in his best light, but he felt like it made it seem like the archaeologist did the dig. And I said, I don't think anyone thinks that. But it was weird. Like, I think he thought the movie was going to be about him. So, which it is. I mean, it is half about him. But by the way, part of that was, there was a lot of pushback from Xbox, which I can say because they all got fired before the movie ever came out. So but there was a lot of pushback on the present day stuff. They just said, well, why don't you just do the stuff about Atari in the past, and who cares about this dig in the present, and who cares about the mystery of the games, and no one's going to care how he dug it up. And I was mystified. I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, it's a great little mystery, and cutting in all these clips from Spielberg movies, and so I basically fought to keep every single bit of Joe. As you can see from the deleted scenes, I tried to keep everything I could, but ironically, he was the only one. I'm sure Ray Kassar, I don't know where he is. I'm sure he wasn't too happy about it. That might not have been fair to him. But Manny, I mean, that guy's awesome, and he loved it. And Howard, obviously, I mean, loved it.
Yeah, we invited Howard to come, but he couldn't make it. But he sends everybody his best. But I think this, this movie is like a redemption for him, and he gets recognized all the time now because this movie I get recognized more than anything else because of people like, you're the guy from E.T.? And I'm like, I guess I am the guy from E.T.
And what is hilarious is I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, you made the Atari Game Over. Wow, I love that movie. And I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I directed. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize you directed it. I was like, really? Because I'm in it. I mean, and they're like, oh, you are? I mean, were you a big fan of Atari? I'm like, what? The movie opens with me showing it with my family. And I just realized I'm really anonymous in movies. Like, people don't, if I wear a hat, I'm not recognized.
But like we've all been recommended this movie, I'm sure. Like I get people always saying, like, "Have you seen Atari Game Over?"
Yeah, you would love it. It's right up your alley. Yeah.
Send me a link.
What I love about the way you directed this movie, very few directors, and I can't think of any other documentary directors who are comfortable making themselves the comic relief. You know, the way that
Louis Theroux is a friend of mine and
yeah.
someone who does a good job with it.
But I love that. Anybody else have a question? You, sir.
What was it like? You guys worked on this documentary together, kind of as friends, as you know, nerd enthusiasts, kind of in that kind of way. And then you went to work together to write Ready Player One. What was it like going from that experience to then like co-writing a movie together?
It was, for me, it was perfect. It was like the coolest way to meet him, and we kind of became friends during the making of the documentary and got to know each other. And actually came and did an ADR session because not all this stuff, so Zach ended up directing me to like redo some of my lines that didn't get recorded properly. So
well, also for legal reasons.
Yeah.
That's why you had to describe in order to use the Game of Thrones stuff, you had to say those lines. Legal made us do that.
Oh, right. I'm going to Westeros to...
Right.
Yeah,
it's a long deal.
But then we got... George actually asked to borrow that the cool John for his movie theater, that graphic, Game of Thrones graphic, so I think they used that to intro movies in his theater now, but he got a kick out of being in it too. But it was great because then what was so weird about this is Zach and I made this movie that's this documentary that's so closely related to Steven Spielberg, and that was all before we ever knew that Steven was going to be the director of Ready Player One. So it was just and I don't think Steven has still seen it. We recommended it to him.
I don't know about it, but everyone else did. I mean, from my point of view, what I'll say is, I got hired. They had asked me to rewrite it, and there was a number of reasons why I couldn't do a draft of the script. And without going into detail, there was a writer that came between me and who was a very good guy and did a good job, but was a totally different take. I mean, it's not worth going into, but it wasn't. It didn't even have the same title, believe it or not. It was just called The Oasis. And when I read that, I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this. So it took me a while to decide to do it, but when I did, I then had to spend 6 months making this documentary. So I stewed in the world of Ernie Cline's juices, is the way I like to put it, just to discuss people. But so while I was thinking about what to do, I was talking to Ernie a lot, and I'm a big believer as a screenwriter. In general, Hollywood's this very cutthroat place, and people don't, if a writer gets replaced, or even if there's a novelist who wrote the novel, believe it or not, they don't talk to them, and I think that's ridiculous. And so for me, it was like, okay, let me get Ernie's point of view and hear everything he has to say and talk through all my ideas before I put pen to paper. And so when I actually sat down I wrote the draft really quickly, just because I talked it all through with Ernie. I had some ideas, I'm not going to tell you what they are, but because you'll see them in the movie. And Ernie was like, well, okay, but what if you did this and that? So I think that's what made that such a charm process. And then Spielberg signed on, and everything went nuts from there. So, but I really think if it hadn't been for this documentary, I would not have, I either would have adapted it exactly, I would have just done exactly what I was told. I mean, I don't know what I would have done, but there's no way I would have felt like, look, one thing I'll say is this. Ernie says something in this documentary that to me is the mantra of Ready Player One. I don't care if Ernie disagrees with me or Steven disagrees with me, because Ernie said it, and therefore it's true, which is, he said, I love things, and I love people who love things. And I think, to me, one of the key things that hit me is that that's what this book is about, and that's what the movie is about, is if Ernie just said, I love things, period. I like my things, and I like to keep them in my car, and that's the end of it. Don't touch my things. And that's what Ready Player One was about. It would suck, right? That would not be a very entertaining, it wouldn't be very enlightening. But the point is, he loves the people who loves the thing. Like when he meets someone who has the same interests, and Ernie's got a lot of interests, that's what brings them together. And the idea, we all grew up in a world where nerd culture was considered nerdy and horrible, and Steven Spielberg movies were considered populist drivel by my parents, and comic books were stupid. And I know that might seem weird to you today, but to us, loving X-Men comics and realizing they're really good and worth talking about, brought you together with other people, you know, and there is zero wrong with that. The idea that somehow because it's popular that makes it not have depth or meaning, well, that's exactly what we're talking about here with video games. Is if you think these video games are trite or simple, I don't think any of you do, but a lot of people do. They don't understand the brilliance of 3 lives, you know, as Seamus says. That is a brilliant concept that is not, you know, it's not drivel. So to me, that whole notion drove my attitude towards the movie and towards the script of like embracing the idea of the mutual love of a thing is more important than what that specific thing is. I mean, it could have been a mutual love of James Joyce, which would be not a very popular movie. Anyway.
No, it's true. I remember there was a draft where he actually put that he put that line of dialogue, had Wade say it.
Yeah, no, it was in the draft. It was in for a really long time.
Yeah.
In fact, there is an echo of it. I don't know if you caught it, but the line is echoed. Well, I won't give it away, but you will hear when eventually the movie comes out, you'll hear an echo of that line spoken by a different character.
But that was this documentary setting the stage. I agree totally. It was one of the reasons that we had such a great experience collaborating, because he would just call me all the time. We already had like a foundation that was based on Atari, you know, and so much of Zak's love of Atari and adventure and mine, it all ended up making its way through all the drafts and is in the movie. So like I think Ready Player One is going to end up being kind of the biggest movie ever to feature an Atari game, you know, in it. So I'm really excited.
And I should say Adam Stockhausen, the production designer, watched the movie and loved it. And when you see the movie, you will catch that some photographs of Ernie became inspirational in terms of some of the design in the movie. As you know, I mean, he really took a lot from Ernie, because you know there's a lot of Ernie in the book, and so finding the reality of Ernie's life and kind of transposing it into it's really, the whole thing is really mind-twisty, meta, crazy experience.
And awesome. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah, one more question. You in the back.
Hey, so if you were to make another documentary, what would the myth or legend be?
What's the next one? Wow. Well, I am doing a show already about cryptozoology, so that's going to cover a lot of them. But it's although it's fictional. I mean, look, I'm a big fan of Werner Herzog. I've made a couple of movies with him, and I like his kind of. I don't have any of the courage that he has. He's like, I always joke, he's like 10 times the man that anyone else in the room. You know, you'll say, Werner, you know, how many times have you been shot at? And he says, in Africa or in the whole world? I mean, I once did a Q&A with him on the same day he had been shot. He'd been shot in the stomach. It was random. Anyway, so I would probably go try to find some sort of Herzogian quest and then do my typical lame job of it. But I don't know. You know, this was one of those weird things. Someone said, would you be interested in making a documentary of the burial of ET games in the desert? And I said, yes. And they're like, well, I was like, yep, I'll do it. And they said, it's not going to pay anything. I was like, I'm in. Just, when do we start? And they're like, a month. I'm like, okay, let's go. And it appealed to me. So if something like that comes around, I would do it. But if you have an idea, let me know.
One more. There was a lady back there who had her hands up, the striped shirt. Yeah.
I was just curious, how did George R.R. Martin come to borrow your
Isn't it obvious?
Well, I will tell you that, I have a crazy history with DeLorean. So when I sold Ready Player One, both the book and the movie in a 48-hour period, it kind of changed my whole life. And my dream car had always been a DeLorean. So I was like, I can finally buy a DeLorean, and I can use it in my author photo, which is perfect because my book is kind of a time machine from the 80s. And then I could also take it around the country on my book tour, which would make my book signings a lot more fun, and it would make the car a business expense. So that's what I did. And it's been, that car, my DeLorean's been in the New York Times twice. So it's proof that it's not just a giant toy. that I play with. It's a business expense. But then I had a contest when the paperback for Ready Player One came out, and where I gave away, I needed to give away a grand prize, and I couldn't think of anything cooler than a DeLorean, but I didn't want to give away my DeLorean, Ecto 88, so I bought a second DeLorean and gave that away in the paperback contest. I jumped forward to like 2 or 3 years later. The winner of the contest decided he was going to sell the car, and I asked him if he ever did that to contact me. So he sold the car back to me because it was the Ready Player One contest car, and I didn't want to just end up with anybody. So for this brief period of time, then I had 2 DeLoreans, which I didn't know what to do with.
Which we all have that.
Yeah. But they were both special cars to me. I didn't want to give either one away. And then there was this, then George R. R. Martin, who had sat in my DeLorean, my first DeLorean, at a convention that we both appeared at, where I interviewed him. You can see it on YouTube, on my YouTube account. There's like an hour-long interview I did where they asked me at a convention to interview George, and then afterwards he came out and wanted to check out my car. That's when I got those great pictures of George in my car. And then he has this movie theater in Santa Fe that he bought where he shows old movies, and they were going to open the bar and do with a rep screening of Back to the Future. So he called me up. I got this. It's the coolest thing ever when your phone says George R. R. Martin, and I answered it. He's like, "Do you still have that time machine?" And I said, "Yes." It doesn't work, if you're trying to meet your deadlines. It's not gonna help you. I'm showing Back to the Future. Can I borrow it? And I said, "Can I tell people that you're borrowing it?" And he said yes. And I said, "Deal, done." So he, I lent him the car for a couple months, and it was at his house. And then when I heard about Zak's documentary, I just said, "Oh, can you hold on to it?" So that car was sitting in George R. R. Martin's garage for like a month until I came to pick it up and take it up to the documentary. And the end of that story is, after I had taken it to the dump, I had no idea what I was doing. Every inch and crevice of that car, inside and out, was filled with Atari land. So were we. We were covered in it. Oh my gosh.
I threw my shoes out. I threw my
It was
shirt
the
out.
best. The best shower of my life was at the end of that day after we washed all the landfill dump. But the car, just every little nook and cranny of it was filled with that. And then I ended up giving that car to my little brother, Eric, who's right there, who is he had to take it apart piece by piece and get all the dirt out of it, but he's since turned it into a Star Wars car. So the DeLorean, that's my brother's car that's in the movie, and he's got an R2 unit on the back, and you can see pictures of it online. But that's the story of the long-winded story of that DeLorean.
Is that what you expected?
I know, that's great. But anyway, we probably are out of time. Thank you guys. So we're gonna meet you guys outside. We'll have ET out there if anybody wants to take pictures with us and ET. And I think we also have a bunch of little Ready Player One mini posters to hand out that you guys can pick up, I think, down here. So thank you guys again so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.